I think we all know at the bottom of our hearts that the landscape is what supports us. And if we get that wrong, the farm won't support us for too long either. I'm David Marsh. I'm a farmer from Boorowa, New South Wales, the Southwest Slopes. It's a farm that's 814 hectares in size, and I've been here since 1971. Back in the day, I was a wool grower with a self-replacing merino flock, occasionally some cattle, and about 30% of the place running crops. Since 1999, we have run some stock on adjustment, but now we're running all adjustment. That's our business at the moment. We're selling sunlight and grass. So 50 years ago, I wasn't anxious about drought. I was a young person trying to succeed at agriculture, which in my terms then was producing more. And I used to absolutely stumble into droughts and not do what I should have been doing because I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to measure grass or work out how long the grass I had would last the animals I was running. And now I used to say, oh, I'm prepared for a drought because I've got 4 silos full of grain and I've got a hay shed full of hay. But that always failed. And you know, we go $100,000 in reverse every time we got into a dry spell. So I'd do the classic bumble into drought, get optimistic, think it'd rain, and then it didn't rain, and then you'd panic and start selling into a collapsing market, you know, bleeding cash like it was a river of money flying out of your bank account, and looking at the farm that you love and seeing it turned into a desert. You know, that was incredibly depressing. I didn't think there was another choice. But the land is incredibly forgiving, and I should have gone out of business because of the way I was behaving. But it was so forgiving that it let me get past that and come to another realisation. Because I had to admit that this farm that looked like a desert, I was responsible for the scenes that I was looking at. That kicked me into action. I went on a journey to try and find other ways of doing things that wouldn't create those horrible environmental scenes that we hate, that farmers desperately want to avoid, but mostly we don't know how to avoid them. Over 10 to 15 years, I found other ways of doing things that were better for the landscape and better for people and better for the business, really. In '99, I did the holistic course. You're looking at the people, the business and the environment. I probably did what they advise you not to do, to don't change everything all at once, but I'd done a lot of reading in those 8 or 9 years prior to that, and I was confident that we could make a go of it. The assumption has always been that overgrazing is having too many animals. Well, it's really not about that. It's about how long the plants are exposed to the animals each time they graze them and how long recovery they get. We got to the point of realising that we were limiting our farming capacity by having too many mobs of stock in too many paddocks, and we were limiting the plant's capacity to harvest sunlight. So we went from 26 paddocks to 104 in a few years. And then when you get that many paddocks, there's plenty of places where you can't put dams and you couldn't afford it anyway. So we put the water in a pipe, and so we've got about 20 k's of 2.5-inch pipe running around the place delivering water to stock. But basically the water and the fences happened within 3 years of doing the course. And we had quite a lot of debt then, but we paid for that by stopping the money that we were spending on fertilisers and chemicals. So that cost $85 a hectare to do that. Now that was a one-off cost, but it's every year that you don't spend that money on fertilisers and chemicals, you're saving that amount every year. In 2002, we started monitoring sort of what was happening to ground cover. And when we started, we had about 30% bare ground, and within 3 years, we had 100% ground cover. That was incredibly encouraging. And we started to notice that a few of the native warm season perennials were going to seed at least twice in those years, because there's not no rain in a drought. So the dry conditions actually were good at the kick-starting some of these changes. The question about what does the country feel like after you start changing, you know, our soils were like concrete really when we were cropping. You know, cropping paddocks would be before rain in the autumn, they'd be ring like steel under your boots, I used to say. After a few years, we started to feel like we were walking on eider-downs rather than steel. So that was good. Full ground cover is absolutely fundamental for a good water cycle. The water cycle is what drives everything, water cycle and the solar energy input. So we do everything in our power to try and stop animals coming back onto country that's not fully recovered from the last grazing it has. We then plan what we call a feed budget. So we work out how many days of grazing are on the whole farm. That takes about 2 hours. Then you've got to figure that you can ration out to the number of sheep equivalents. On our plan at the moment, we have a 150-day recovery period for slow growth. Fast growth, 60 days. The really big thing it gives you is that it allows you to see up to 7 months ahead all the time with certainty as to how much grass you've got. Now, having done that, it sounds incredibly conservative, but it's saved us millions of dollars really in not having to feed anything. And because you're aware of how much grass you've got and how long it's going to last, you can start to make early decisions about changing numbers. I suppose this ability to match your livestock to the carrying capacity of the country so that the country's always inviting and able to support other species, that's probably the most important thing I think we've come across. But having done that, when it rained, there was no runoff, we didn't have fences washing away anymore. The place recovered incredibly quickly and we hadn't spent any money, so that was very calming. You know, we had quite a lot of debt and I just assumed that I could never make any impression on it. I must have been a bad farmer. But now, having forgotten about chasing the money, we find making decisions toward the environment and reacting with our numbers as the environment changes over the seasons, we find that we actually don't have any debt. I never thought that would happen. I don't even call it a drought anymore because for the last 24 years, 12 of those years have been below average rainfall years. So it's a normal part of our climate. I still look at animals and feel proud that they're doing well on our farm, but I'm very keen on looking at the diversity in the paddocks and knowing that that's increasing. That makes me feel even better. What's interesting and important about this, it's only 2 species, but this is wallaby grass, this fine leaf plant. It's a year-long green plant, and hey presto, right beside it, living in conjunction with it and probably sharing fungi with its roots, is microlina, which is another beautiful native grass. You know, these species, there were a few of them up here, but mostly it was covered in thistles and weeds. Here and there are patches of recovering diversity. By allowing these species to gradually develop, you're having a major effect on the resilience in the landscape, which is tied up with diversity. If you're getting diversity, you're getting more species living under the soil, the whole thing is moving in the right direction. If our farms are becoming more diverse, everything starts to fall into place. The water cycle gets better, the landscape holds more water, that makes it better when things get dry. You go into the drought last and you mostly come out of it first. But you know, that doesn't happen if you don't change. You've got to change something. These old trees that we can see here, there was only 3% of the landscape had the remnant timber on it. Now, if these old trees don't reproduce, we're witnessing the end of the woodland era. And that is a massive biome that goes from southwest Queensland right through into South Australia. Since we started different grazing with longer recoveries, since 2010 we've had about 1,000 saplings that have come up and are turning into trees. Tree cover on this place now is 20%, so it's sort of approaching what it may have been before we started doing things. Conditions are more moderate downwind of a tree plantation for up to 15 or 20 times its height. They're recycling minerals, bringing minerals up. That's a very long process, longer than a human life, but it is significant. Back in the day, I wasn't thinking really about conservation so much, although my father was an early conservationist. I didn't follow his lead for quite a while. But now I'm not so interested in production. Production is a function of getting the ecology of the farm ticking along all right. I used to mistakenly think that the crops and the animals were my business, but really they come after you get the farm ecology going. So there's an ecological knowledge, I think, in ecosystems to be more diverse. That's the default of nature, and agriculture tends to produce the opposite effect. So it produces simplified communities, but if you change who you are and do things differently, ecosystems can once again become more diverse. That's a resilience thing for everything really, for us, our businesses and the land.